Okay guys, we're doing more factoring. Please listen to what I'm about to say. Every time we factor, we want to make sure that we take out the greatest common factor first. So, we're going to go back over taking out greatest common factor. We're going to look at sliding and dividing. We're going to look at factoring using just the x. So, day one, we're going to focus on can you factor. Then tomorrow, we're going to focus on can you solve, which you may just go ahead and watch all of the notes today because I'm just going to record on one video. Okay, writing a polynomial in factored form. So, look at this. We have an x cubed. Is there something that all of them have in common? Yes. So, make sure you factor out GCF first. The greatest common factor here is x. So then that leaves me with x squared minus 2x minus 15 equals 0. Then factor the trinomial. So like here, this is the trinomial. What multiplies to negative 15 and adds to negative 2. So think of your factors of 15. We got 1 and 15, 3 and 5. Well, the answer is negative 5 and 3. Now, don't forget, we took out an x, so the x has to come down. So my factors are x times x minus 5 times x plus 3. The first one is factored. The next one, again, look, is there something they all have in common? We factor out GCF first. Greatest common factor here is x. Then factor the trinomial. And remember, the trinomial is the one with 3 terms. So we draw our x. What multiplies to negative 12 adds to negative 1. So factors of 12, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Well, this would be negative 4 and 3. So then we drop down our x again. We're at x minus 4 times x plus 3. And then we're done. Okay, this next one. When you have 4 terms, I'm going to type this. When you have 4 terms, try factoring by grouping or use reverse box. I'm going to show you 2 different ways to solve this. Okay? Method 1. Okay, what you do is put them in groups of 2. Take out GCF from each group. Okay, so here, the greatest common factor of this group is 7n. So we take that out. That leaves us with n. That's supposed to be cubed. So hold on. Okay, so they're both divisible by 7, and the highest exponent I can take out is n squared. Okay? Then we write 7n squared on the outside. Okay, 7n cubed divided by 7n squared is just n. Negative 35n squared divided by 7n is 5. Over here, when it's negative, when third term is negative, factor out negative number. So here, we're going to take out a negative 4. That's the greatest common factor. And that leaves me with n minus 5. Okay. Factors in parentheses must match. Once they do, you drop these down. And then it's factor. That's the first method. That's factoring by grouping. Method 2. Oops, can't spell. You draw your box and put all your terms in the box. Okay, think about what's the greatest common factor here. Okay, what's the greatest common factor here? 7n squared. I did it again, that should be cubed. 7n squared is the greatest common factor. Well then, 7n squared times what would give you 7n cubed? Well, that would be n. So n goes here. Then n times what would give you negative 4n? We're looking at this box. Well, that would have to be negative 4. So negative 4 goes here. Then, how do we get this box? 7n squared times what is going to give you negative 35n squared? Well, wouldn't that have to be negative 5? So then, look, there's your factors. Okay, that's factoring using the box. Some people like that better. Okay, factoring by grouping here. Put them in parentheses. What's the greatest common factor of 14 and 12? Well, that's 2. Take out the smallest exponent they have in common. Well, biggest exponent technically is n squared. So that leaves me with 7n plus 6. Over here, again, this is a negative number. So when the third term's negative, you have to factor out a negative number. And the greatest common factor of 21 and negative 18 is negative 3. And remember, guys, if you are terrible with greatest common factor, the calculator can find that for you if you need it. So, calculator trick. You hit shift, or no, not shift, alpha, and then times. to get the greatest common factor. And then you put your two numbers. And that should tell you the greatest common factor here is 3. Okay? Don't type in negative numbers or it's going to give you an error. Okay? So then we make sure these match. So then drop these down. And there we go. If you wanted to use the box, put all your terms in the box. Okay, ask yourself, what's the greatest common factor here? Well, that's 2n squared. 2n squared times what is going to give you 14n cubed? Well, that's 7n. And then 7n times what's going to give you negative 21n? That's negative 3. And then negative 3 times what would give you negative 18? Well, that would have to be 6. So there's your factors there. That's factoring by grouping. It's a lot. Pick the way that works best for you. If you can't figure out the greatest common factor, try the calculator thing. Okay, then this one, again, every time you tackle these problems, take out the greatest common factor. So that's x. Then figure out what multiplies to negative 4. Oh, we have no middle term, so it's got to add the 0. So that would be negative 2 and 2. This is a difference of squares, guys. And that one's factored. Again, take out GCF. Then figure out what multiplies to negative 16, adds to 0, negative 4 and 4. Okay, we're still factoring. Again, you have to take out the greatest common factor. Okay, factor the trinomial. Now you got to factor this by sliding and dividing. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. What multiplies to negative 2 and adds to 1? 2 and negative 1. Don't forget that x is still there. So then, don't forget, you got to divide by a. Divide by 2. Slide it over if it doesn't divide evenly. Okay. Next one. Take out GCF. This time, 9, 6, and 3 are all divisible by 3, and they all have at least one x. So we're going to take out 3x here, and that leaves us with 3x squared plus 2x minus 1. Then slide and divide. 3 times negative 1, negative 3 has to add to 2. That's 3 and negative 1. Then we divide by 3. And then we slide. Okay. Okay, at this point, that takes care of day 1 of the notes. So then, you can stop the video, or you can keep watching if you're ready for day 2. Okay, so this is day 2 of notes. Okay, finding the zeros of a polynomial function. Zeros are the points where it crosses the x-axis. So all you have to do, once you have something factored, set them all equal to 0. Factor, and then set factors equal to 0. And solve for x. So this one, we get x equals -3. It's going to cross the x-axis at -3. This one's going to cross the x-axis at 1. And this is going to cross the x-axis at 3. So you got some kind of function. That's going to cross, say this is -3, this is 1, this is 3, so it could look something like this. Okay, just to give you a visual, I know it's going to be down and then up, because if I were to multiply all that out, my a would be positive and odd, because I got 3 x's, so that'd be x cubed. Now, since you have 3 x's, that should tell you that your graph is going to cross the x-axis at least 3 times. The degree of the polynomial gives you an idea of at most how many times the graph's going to cross the x-axis. So that's what we're trying to find here. It just gives us a rough idea of what the shape of the graph is going to look like. Okay, next one, writing a polynomial function from its zeros. This is what this means. I have x equals -2, x equals 2, and x equals 3. We're going to work backwards. Get right side to equal 0. So how do I get the right side equals 0 here? +2. There's one factor. Here, you're going to subtract 2. Subtract 3. And then you make sure, we're just going to put y equals here. Because it's a function. So there you go. You work backwards. Notice how I wrote x equals -2, x equals 2, x equals 3. And I got each one of those to equal 0 for each factor. On this next one, again, set each of them equal to 0. Okay, this one's a little different. We could just say, okay, we're going to subtract 5/4. Just know that's got to slide over, because we're not going to leave it like that. That looks funky. That's a real factor. this is a real factor. But what about when we have square root of 2? So how about this? We square both sides first. That looks more like a factor. So then we can write our function as y equals 4x minus 5 times x minus 1 times x squared minus 2, and there we go. So make sure that you get them all, like you're basically reverse factoring them. Work backwards. And you could potentially multiply all these out, but I'm not going to make you. We're just going to leave them in factored form. Okay, multiplicity. If you have a repeated factor, you have a multiple 0. You can describe the multiplicity by the number of times a factor is repeated. So here, example, this is repeated. The repeated factor is x minus 3, so the multiplicity is 2 because it occurs twice as a factor. If no factors repeat, then the multiplicity is 1. Okay, on the next page, we're just going to factor, then talk about multiplicity. So, take out the greatest common factor first. Greatest common factor here, they both have at least an x squared. Then what multiplies to negative 8 and adds to negative 2? 1 and 8, 2 and 4. So that'd be negative 4 and 2. Okay, so you may be wondering, well, it doesn't look like there's a multiplicity. Yeah, there is. This could be written as x times x. So my multiplicity is 2. Because we have x times x. Okay, the next one, when I factor it, I take out an x. And I figure out what multiplies to 4 and adds to negative 4, which is negative 2 and negative 2. And then do we have a multiplicity? Yeah, we do. Multiplicity is 2 because of the x minus 2 factor. Okay guys, so if you're ready for day 2 homework, let's just go back over what do I expect out of you. Okay, here's what I expect. Here's the first problem. Factor and find all zeros, meaning solve. Make sure your calculator is in complex mode because some answers may contain I. Okay, so the first one, you got to factor by sliding and dividing. This would be -6 and -5. And you divide by 3. Okay, so we got it factored, now solve. So these are my zeros on the first one, x equals 2 and x equals 5/3. The other problem, we'll look at a couple. On number 3, I'll just give you a hint, factor by grouping. Because you have 4 terms. On 5, I want to walk through 5 with you. Okay, this one, you're going to do slide and divide. 5 times 12 is 60. 15 and 4 are your factors. Notice that this is an x to the 4th, so cut in half when factoring. So that's where we get x squared plus 15 times x squared plus 4. Then, don't forget it's sliding and dividing, so we divide by 5. Okay, it's factored. Now set both factors equal to 0. Okay, since it's a negative, when you take the square root of a negative number, make sure you're in mode 2, and this is what we get. Because you can't take the square root of a negative number unless you're in complex mode, so that's why we have an I. Take the square root here, we get x equals, your calculator can break this down, plus or minus 2i square root 5 over 5. Okay, that's it for 5.2. There's some problems to get you started. Remember, if the exponent's 4, just cut it in half.